Welcome to the Marc Steiner Show here on The Real News. I'm Marc Steiner. It's great to have you all with us. We're talking today with Huwaida Arraf, a Palestinian woman, a lawyer, born in Israel, an internationally renowned human rights lawyer, trilingual in English, Arabic, and Hebrew, a nonviolent activist who co-founded International Solidarity Network, fighting for Palestinian rights and nationhood. She ran for Congress in Michigan's 10th Congressional District, writes extensively, and puts her mind, body, literally, and spirit on the line for Palestinian freedom. And Huwaida, welcome. Good to have you with us.
It's good to be with you, Mark. Thank you.
You have been, doing this for a while.
Yeah, I had hoped it wouldn't be this long, but, the fight goes on.
As we had this conversation today, I was looking at the news before I walked into the studio, and Israel has resumed their operations in Central and South Gaza. They've started their airstrikes. 20 Palestinians were killed, almost all of them health workers. 400 Palestinians were killed in airstrikes since the beginning of this conflict. It's what's happening in Gaza is almost unbelievable. I think it's hard for people to fathom the extent of death and destruction that's taking place. It is not simply a war.
Absolutely. I don't like to use that term at all because war implies you have two equal sides, and that's absolutely not what you have here, right? You have a population that has been oppressed and colonized for nearly 8 decades, and for the past almost 2 decades in Gaza specifically, really has been caged and cut off from essentials. And you take that, and over the years also, every few years, Israel bombs, decimates the society, the infrastructure. You have a medieval kind of siege that's imposed on the entire civilian population that really leaves people not able to control even their daily lives. Forget about just being able to leave the Gaza Strip to go get what you need, to go to school, to visit family, to get the medical attention that you need. What you might be able to find food that day is completely determined by what Israel allows in and what doesn't allow in. And for the past 2.5 weeks before it restarted this barbaric bombardment of Gaza, has been cutting off all food and medical aid, and then just cut off also electricity, which means they can't desalinate water. People have nothing. It is truly a caged, beleaguered, starved population that Israel has also restarted viciously bombing from the air. So just in the past, couple of days, nearly 500 killed, so many children, at least the last number. And I don't even like to say numbers because it changes by the minute, but over 180 children, babies, infants. And no one seems to be able to stop Israel. No one is willing to do it. And the reports are that the United States, the White House, has given the green light. They were briefed on it, and the slaughter continues. It really, I am unable to find words these days to describe to the evil that we're witnessing.
And you mentioned the United States. The kind of lack of political will in the Biden administration to intervene and stop it. And now we're faced with a government in this country which actively supports Israel in its destruction of Palestinians and the murder of Palestinians. It is really time for, I think, those of us in America to step up and really heighten the protests and the confrontations with our own government to say, no, this can't take place. So I'm curious as an activist here, where you see that going, where you see what our role is here in the United States to stop this kind of genocide taking place in Gaza.
Absolutely. And that is the question, right? Because I worked for a long time volunteering in the occupied Palestinian territory and, welcoming people from around the world to come see what's actually happening in Palestine. And Palestinians would be so grateful for the international solidarity and for people leaving the comforts of their own home to travel to stand with them. But what we would hear over and over again from Palestinians is just, please go back to your countries, especially the United States, and change the policies there, because it is the policies of especially the Western countries led by the United States that's enabling Israel. And so what we do here in the United States really, really matters. It's not adequate to just say it's not our problem, it's not happening here, it's thousands of miles away, because we are so actively involved and complicit. It's our tax dollars, it is our elected representatives that are making these choices to continuously fund Israel's genocide. So it comes down to us to create that political will to change policy. Now, how do we do that? It seems to be really overwhelming. A lot of it really comes down to educating people, because for decades we have been programmed here in the United States by the mainstream media, by popular culture, to dehumanize Palestinians and to think that Israel is the victim here. So there's a lot of education that goes into it, opening people's eyes in terms of what has really been happening, and then changing that or moving that education into mobilization and really pushing our elected representatives to make the right choices to stop funding genocide and colonialism and apartheid. And so that requires us making our voices heard, whether in the streets, in protest, going to town halls, making appointments with our elected representatives, calling them, writing to them every day, and letting them know that this is an issue that matters, that we care about, that we will vote on. Yes, there are other issues that affect our daily lives, but this is also an issue that affects life, and it affects our daily lives, because it is not just about being, what happens in Palestine. Yes, that's horrible, but I have other concerns. What happens in Palestine and the extent in which the United States is funding and enabling what Israel's doing comes back here to affect us. If we look at the billions and billions of dollars that this government and the previous government, and for decades, the United States has been giving of our tax dollars to Israel, that money can be spent in our own communities. I mean, $3.8 billion, that's just yearly without all of the extra packages that Israel has gotten, which is now in the last 16, 17 months has topped, I think, 30 billion. So yearly, it's 3.8 billion of our tax dollars. And on top of that, the United States has authorized more and more money and weapons shipments to Israel that can be used in our own communities. Then when we talk about our own civil liberties here, the extent to which there is a crackdown on freedom of speech and on education, and that people are being doxxed and fired from their jobs and silenced if they dare to criticize Israel, that affects our own civil liberties here. And I am involved in cases to defend students' rights who have been persecuted, who have been kicked out of school, their organizations suspended because they advocate for Palestinian rights. So if it's not our tax dollars in our own communities and life in Palestine, it is our own ability to speak out and to exercise our freedom of speech that is being curtailed and actually really threatened, all to protect a country that is committing a genocide. It is really shameful. And I think that when we look back at this time, and I firmly believe there will come a time where we will look back and truly feel ashamed that we allowed this to happen. Those who were silent or those who advocated for this policy of supporting this genocide, it will be seen as a stain on U.S. history. And I think what I keep saying is to everyone around me, this is happening in our lifetime, on our watch. What are we going to say we did to stop it? And if we think about that every day, we will find our place, what we can do. It could be joining a protest. I'm heading to a protest today, but it could be talking to your neighbor. It could be picking up the phone to talk to your member of Congress. Each one of us have a role to play. And I think that if we kind of understand that, we can't always be the top. We can't always be at the front of those demonstrations. But if you do what you can from where you are, and we each do that, it will build up. It will create that critical mass that we need to change policy. And I do believe that things have changed in all of the years that you mentioned. I have been doing this, but we need to keep pushing. We need to keep pushing till we reach that tipping point. And I just, seeing all the carnage, you just have to wonder how many more lives destroyed until we get to that tipping point where policy is changed. I mean, that motivates me every single day. And I hope we can all find it in ourselves to realize that there is something we can do about it.
I hope so, too. And I think that, from your work, from helping to found Free Gaza in 2006 with your co-founding International Solidarity, the nonviolent movement to fight for Palestinian rights, that we seem to be in a precipice at the moment, though. Given what's happening in Gaza, given the crackdown in this country on Palestinians and who are standing up, and given the crackdowns taking place inside Israel at this moment, people I've talked to who are both Jewish Israelis and Palestinian Israelis are talking about the intense pressure that they're under every day, some even being arrested because they're standing up to the government saying no. I mean, I don't think people just really get and understand the depth of the repression that's taking place on the West Bank, in Gaza, and in Israel itself.
Yep. Absolutely. I have family. So my family is partially from the West Bank, and the other part is from inside 48, what is now Israel. And so,
And you're an Israeli citizen as well, or were, right?
an Israeli citizen, yes. Of course, I mean, I always say I'm not the kind of citizen that Israel wants, unfortunately. I'm considered a demographic threat, because of, again, Israel's project of really colonization. And when we call it apartheid, it's not just throwing out words. It really is a government and a regime that wants to create a society and a state with specific rights for certain people based on your religion. So even though my village and my family was there before the state of Israel was created, we are not equal citizens. And the last time I talked to my family, I mean, they're terrified. They can't say anything in their place of work. If they like a Facebook post, they could be arrested, right? And they have Israeli citizens that are walking around armed, coming into their place of business, whether it is their clinics or their shops. And you don't know if what you're going to say is going to get you injured, killed, arrested. And those are Palestinians who are citizens of Israel, who Israel likes to say are, equal or have, more rights than they would have anywhere else, which is just not true at all. And then when you talk about Israeli citizens, I mean, yeah, there are protests. People are not happy with, Netanyahu, and there is, especially the families of the hostages and other people who are worried about the hostages are protesting and are getting arrested for these protests. And there is a crackdown. I wish I had something a little bit better or more hopeful to say about Israeli society, because I have, spent so many years in the occupied territories and worked with some wonderful Israelis who put their safety and their lives on the line and firmly believe in true equality and spend their time in Palestinian villages and standing up to their own soldiers. But those numbers are so, so few. The polls are showing that a vast majority of Israelis support what their government has been doing in Gaza. If they didn't have hostages in Gaza, they wouldn't care at all about the Palestinian civilians there and what's happening to them. And that's really frightening. I mean, that's frightening just from a humanitarian perspective. That's frightening when you think about any society to be supportive of such ruthless violence. And if it wasn't for, having some of your own people there, wouldn't care at all what happens to the population that your government is occupying, oppressing, and killing. And so that is scary. And what we have been seeing from Israeli society is this decline towards more isolationism, fascism, violence. And it's not good for anybody, certainly not good for Israeli society. And even the future, where I've always said that we need to live together, and what we're working to create, we're working to end Israeli colonialism and apartheid so that there can be a future where anybody and everybody who wants to live in historic Palestine, in this land, can do so as equals, right? And what we have been seeing, again, on the enormous violence unleashed on Palestinians and the almost complete disregard by Israelis, except for where it concerns, their own population, it means that it's going to be very, very, very difficult to rebuild a lot of that. And this is, we're talking about it because we don't have too much time, but we shouldn't just gloss over the amount of violence being used. And that's not just in Gaza. That's not just when we come to the death and dismemberment and amputations and the starvations, but the torture, the deliberate killings, the humiliation, the children who have seen their parents killed, dismembered, humiliated. What kind of psychological effect this has on people is really hard to fathom. And especially when we're looking at Gaza, but also the West Bank, this is all Palestinians have known, most Palestinians for their entire lives, is this kind of violence, is this kind of complete disregard by the international community and the rest of the world, and just this overwhelming oppression and this attempt really to get rid of you. You're an undesirable, your life doesn't matter. That's all Palestinians have known. And despite this, they try to continue. They try to insist on life, but what kind of psychological effect this has on people is really hard to know. Before as of like 20 years ago, before these massive bombings started in Gaza, it's a Gaza Community Mental Health Program that was saying over 90% of Gaza's children are traumatized.
Yes.
And that is back in 2006. You have seen at least 5 massive bombing campaigns since then, and now an act of full-blown genocide. If over 90% of Gaza's children were traumatized before all this, what do we say now? So it is really, really dismal. But that doesn't mean we give up.
No.
We have no choice, right? But to keep going and fighting, because we are fighting for the rights of people to live.
It's true. And those children now you talk about are now in their 20s and 30s.
Yeah.
And trying to survive.
Yeah, trying to survive, probably trying to keep their children alive, probably trying to find a way to keep their children safe, to find food. And these are children that have been traumatized themselves. In 2009, after Israel's first major bombing campaign, Operation Cast Lead on Gaza, this was 2008, 2009, I went in with a delegation of U.S. attorneys to try to document and report on U.S. weapons that were used in Operation Cast Lead to commit war crimes. And we did produce a report after that. But some of the stories that we heard, I mean, one home that was bombed, and Israel did not allow the Red Crescent or any rescue services to get to the home for 3 days. And when they got to the home, found most of the adults in that home killed, and number of children who were still alive, injured, and forced to stay with the relatives, with the bodies of their dead parents for 3 days without food or water. Those children, that was 2008, 2009. If those children even survived what they're trying to do now in keeping they probably hope that their children wouldn't have to endure the same. But not only are they enduring the same, it's so much worse. Now it's as bad as it has ever been, and that doesn't even come remotely close to describing it. There's a report that just came out from the UN, and I'm almost, I've read the bullet points, but I can't even bring myself to read it, because even the summary is so bad. It is so bad about the kind of torture, what people have been subjected to, things that humans should never, ever do to each other. I can't, as a human rights attorney, I'm almost embarrassed to admit, I just can't even bring myself to read it.
What's the name of the report?
It was done by there's a UN fact-finding commission, it's an independent commission that is investigating what Israel is doing in the occupied Palestinian territory and in Gaza. And they came out, I'd have to pull up the report, but one of their findings is that Israel is committing genocidal acts. Israel has deliberately targeted the maternal wards, the ability of Palestinian women to reproduce in various ways. But part of that also covers the torture that Palestinian hostages also have endured in Israeli captivity. And some of the torture tactics and the rape that is described is just horrific. And that's just the summary. So I can pull the exact name of the report for you, but that it was done by an independent fact-finding commission.
Well, we'll add that so people can access that, because I think that's important. I mean, as you describe the reality that Palestinians face, and I think think about you personally. I've been reading all the things you've been writing, and I've been reading about you and the bravery you showed on the flotillas and other places in the face of Israeli violence, standing up to it, putting your life on the line. And you're married to a Jewish man who was thrown out of Israel because he stood up. I mean, this is something people have to understand, I think, for us to get beyond this and to find this path to peace. And there are over 1.5 to 2 million Israelis who no longer live in Israel and live in Europe and live in the United States. Most of them would be the people who oppose this government that's taking place in Israel at this moment. I mean, it's right. I mean,
that's what we're hearing. And then the large number of Israelis who are leaving would be the more kind of moderate ones leaving the Israelis, more the kind of the ideological, this land was given to us by God and it's only our
right.
land and everybody else needs to be kicked out, are the ones that are remaining. And we see the government that is now in power as a right-wing fascist government. And that is as I said earlier, the Israeli society, where it has going, and the fact that it's become so extreme, it doesn't bode well for anyone. But how do we break that, right? And for a lot of the work that I've done, originally when I went over to Palestine in shortly after college, it was in the year 2000, it was to work for a conflict resolution organization that was bringing Palestinian and Israeli youth together.
Seeds of Peace?
Yes.
Right.
And I quickly realized the problem with these organizations because they don't actually get to the heart of the matter. They don't do the work that needs to be done to dismantle the racist structures or the structures of oppression that tear people apart. And it's more about, getting to know each other and doing these normalization projects. Becoming friends is great. Obviously, we have people become lifelong friends. But when you don't actually, or when you avoid the work that needs to be done to dismantle the structures of oppression, then you are just normalizing oppression, right? So I don't necessarily support these organizations, but I went on, even in founding the International Solidarity Movement, it was bringing internationals, but also bringing Israelis and bringing everybody, irrespective of religion, of ethnicity, of nationality. I mean, we are all humans, and we are all standing for freedom and for equality and for dignity for everybody. And there is this attempt to also reach Israelis with the actions that we were doing. A lot of the protests, I was face to face with Israeli soldiers and trying to say, look, what are you doing? You are here shooting at children. You are invading these people's villages, maybe getting them to think about what role they're playing in this violence. And then I think that we are so far from that right now. People just have been so siloed, I feel, and so hard. There's those that are hardened and just don't want to hear anything that has to do with Palestinian humanity. And then there are those, the ideological Israelis that are bent on having this Jewish state that was promised to them by God, and everybody else needs to either agree to be subservient, or they can be killed, or they can get out. And that is really what we are fighting here. We are fighting this idea that there can be any kind of religious or ethno-religious supremacy for anybody. And we are fighting for a world, a region, a country, I mean, everywhere, certainly in Israel, Palestine, but around the world, where everyone is respected and everyone is equal. And we seem to be so far away from that. But I say this because there is this idea, and you probably know well, anytime that we in the United States or in other places speak up for Palestinian rights, we're automatically labeled as anti-Semites.
Or self-hating Jews.
Or you're self-hating Jews. My husband's self-hating Jews all the time. And we seem to just lost this ability to look at each other as humans. And it doesn't bode well for where we are in this moment in time. It is very dangerous what is happening, certainly in the region, but then what is happening here. And I mentioned, we started talking also about the restrictions on our civil liberties here.
Mm-hmm.
We know that we are creating, certainly Trump's policy, cracking down even more on those who speak up for Palestinian rights. But one thing that I want to say there is that it didn't start with Trump, right? It has been US policy, and certainly I blame the previous administration, the Biden administration, for laying the groundwork for where we are now. For 15 months, we were protesting, trying to get the Biden-Harris administration to put an arms embargo on Israel, to stop the genocide. And, they gaslit the American people in that, Israel has a right to defend itself. That's what we always hear. But Israel is not defending itself. Israel is fighting for a land that is free of the indigenous Palestinian population, and the United States has been supporting that. But what is positive, I don't want to be all negative, what is positive is that so many people like yourself, Mark, but so many also younger American Jews, and even when we started the International Solidarity Movement, so many of those who came to join us were young American or European Jews.
Mm-hmm.
We look at the protests on college campuses, so many of them Jewish students who reject this notion that what Israel's doing and what the US is doing in cracking down on protesters in any way serves Jewish safety, certainly not Jewish Americans. And where I am in Michigan, the University of Michigan, we have 12 protesters that are being prosecuted actually by the Attorney General in a shameful, really, prosecution. But about half of those protesters being prosecuted for protesting in the encampments and for Palestinian rights are Jewish. So on one hand, there are those who are really pushing really hard to label all advocates of Palestinian rights as anti-Semitic and supporting this kind of crackdown, whether what Israel's doing or what this administration is doing as, fighting anti-Semitism or protecting the Jewish people, when it's just the opposite. And it's heartening to see that so many young Jews, but also of all ages, I have a good friend who is well into her 80s, Jewish activist, and she's just so feisty, and that I really consider my family, and these are the kind of people that I always want to stand side by side with in fighting for everybody's rights.
So before we end, a couple of things. One is I'm curious, in your life now, you've been through a lot, facing violence in the Israeli army, Navy violence, being on flotillas, the work you've done over there, the work you're doing here, dedicating your life to this. What are you in the midst of now? Where is the struggle taking you now?
That is a good question, because I feel like I'm torn in so many different ways, because there's so much work to be done, and I want to always do as much as I can. One of my most important roles right now, although my kids would probably beg to differ, is raising the next generation. But I frequently hear from them that I'm always busy and I'm always doing something for Palestine or some other social justice issues. So I might be not doing as well as I should be in that arena, but raising the next generation, my kids are 10 and 11. And if I impart anything on them, I want it to be a strong belief in their ability and their obligation to do something when they see that something is wrong, whether it is in their elementary classroom, if somebody is being racist or somebody is being bullied, to stand up, to, if it's the president of the United States, you can get out and protest. When something that's happening that is not right, you are able to and you should do something about it. If I impart anything on them, I want it to be that. So that is one of my most important jobs. But I am also an attorney, and I'm also working with other attorneys both to defend civil liberties here at home. So I am, one, helping with the defense of students who are being persecuted for standing up for Palestinian rights, and also suing the University of Michigan for violating the constitutional rights of these students by treating them differently, by curtailing the First Amendment rights, because these institutions and these state power that is cracking down on our students, on protesters, on citizens, should not be allowed to get away with this. So it's defense and offense there, and activism. We are still trying to support people to go to the occupied Palestinian territory, to volunteer with the international solidarity movement if they are able to. And if somebody can, unfortunately, we cannot get into Gaza, but people are still able to get into Jerusalem and the West Bank, and the international solidarity movement there is trying as much as possible to be a presence, to witness, to document, to stand in solidarity with the people there who are being terrorized by settlers and soldiers. Just in the past month, over 40,000 Palestinians have been forcibly displaced from their refugee camps in Tulkarem and in Jenin. So in these Palestinian cities, Israeli soldiers would come through and literally blow up their homes or demolish their homes. And those that are still in their villages are being attacked by settlers, supported by soldiers. So having people there to witness, to try to deter some of the violence by saying to the state of Israel, like, hey, we're here and we see what you're doing, can help deter violence sometimes, and can help let Palestinians know that they're not alone. So I encourage anyone who is able to travel to look up the International Solidarity Movement and see about volunteering there. At the same time, we are trying to stop the atrocities in Gaza in a variety of ways. I am still involved with the Freedom Flotilla and the Freedom Flotilla Coalition, and that we have been trying for years to break Israel's illegal siege on Gaza. We started, as you mentioned, the first time we got into Gaza with 2 small fishing boats in 2008, and that was a deliberate action to challenge, to confront, to try to break Israel's stranglehold and its naval blockade on Gaza. We were able to get through a few times, but then Israel started lethally attacking our ships, but we did not give up. And we, as of last year, also were pulling together a flotilla. Unfortunately, some states sabotaged our mission, but again, we are not giving up. We are readying ships to try to sail again, and we are encouraging these organizations that are being blocked from entering Gaza and from rendering aid to people to join us, to put their aid on these ships and directly confront Israel's policy, because Israel's policy is illegal. A siege on an entire civilian population is illegal, and it is part of a larger genocide, a crime against humanity. But what is infuriating is that these organizations and world governments only talk, right? They do not do anything to actively confront Israel's policy. So effectively, you have every single government in the world that is respecting Israel's control over Gaza. They are complicit. They are complicit in the starvation and the genocide of the Palestinian people. I mean, the government of Turkey held back 3 of our ships that were supposed to sail to confront Israel's blockade. Why isn't Turkey itself sailing? Why isn't Greece sailing? Why aren't these Arab countries sailing and daring Israel to confront them and to insist that we are getting to the people that you are trying to annihilate in Gaza? So we are still trying to do that as a civilian initiative, and hopefully within the next few weeks or months, I hope it's not longer, your listeners will hear about and are able to support the Freedom Flotilla Coalition and try to break through this blockade. And here at home, aside from the legal front, there's also the political front, and continuing to push our elected representatives and continuing to encourage people that really represent our ideals and our principles, our vision of human rights and equality for everybody, to run for office, right? I am trying to encourage the young people, the Arab Americans, Muslim Americans, to actually get involved, and so our voices are represented and we are heard. So it's a lot of work on a lot of different fronts. Sometimes I feel like I'm trying to be in too many spaces and not doing anything particularly well. But well, we continue to try to do what we can. I think that's important, just as continue to do what we can, and there's a space for everyone.
Well, I want to first say thank you, Huwaida Arraf. You're doing amazing work. I want to stay in touch with you to see how the flotilla gathering is growing and what the next moves are, so we can lend support to that and bring those voices to the people in this country and across the globe. So I appreciate the work you're doing, and thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for having me, and please continue to speak out, because as we know, our freedom of speech is really being threatened right now. And I encourage your listeners to really follow the case of Mahmoud Khalil, who is, the government is trying to set an example by deporting him illegally for speaking out for Palestinian rights. And they are, again, trying to not only make an example of him, but silence speech by sending this chill through the communities, the pro-Palestinian community, or anyone who would dare to speak out. And it is, like I say again, the extent to which our own civil liberties, our right to the First Amendment, our right to due process are really at stake right now is really hard to overemphasize. We need everybody to be watching, to be speaking out, and to be letting our elected representatives know that we will not stand for this and that they need to fight. So thank you for doing your part in continuing to speak out and bring voices of protest, of dissent to your listeners. And I would love to stay in touch.
We will stay in touch. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Once again, thank you to Huwaida Arraf for joining us today. And thanks to David Hebden for running the program, and audio editor Alina Nelek, and producer Rosette Sawali for making it all work behind the scenes, and everyone here at The Real News for making this show possible. Please, let me know what you thought about what you heard today, what you'd like us to cover. Just write to me at mss@therealnews.com, and I'll get right back to you. Once again, thank you to Huwaida Arraf for joining us today and for the work that she does. So for the crew here at The Real News, I'm Marc Steiner. Stay involved, keep listening, and take care.